Welcome to Equitable Exchanges, a presentation created by the Behavior Barriers team to not only address inequities, but reckon with those inequities we see and experience in order to be a voice of change. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, the Denver Public Schools acknowledges that we are gathered today in our homes and buildings on the ancestral land of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. This area was also the site of trade, hunting, gathering, and healing for many other Native nations. The Ute, Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, and many other Native nations. We also acknowledge that our country was built with stolen labor and the generational wealth which was created by the hands and on the backs of enslaved Africans has been kept from them while enriching others. Although this is not a live presentation, I would like to still begin with norms, as they are relative to reflections that will be encouraged during this presentation. The first norm is mindfulness and acknowledgement of culture and ethnicities of staff, students, parents, and family members. It is important that we acknowledge and consider these factors, as they can often be overlooked or minimized in importance. Secondly, lean into the discomfort. This is important because we will be talking about biases, racism, and systemic oppression, which can bring up many thoughts and feelings. I ask that you give yourself the space to feel and experience whatever comes up for you, and allow yourself to explore what these feelings are and where they come from. Next, cultivate compassion for self, students, families, and colleagues. Notice self is placed first. We believe it is a fact that one cannot adequately see another without first seeing themselves. With that being said, we ask that you exercise compassion, a human regard for ourselves and others that makes room for grace, growth, and even healing. Lastly, acknowledge your truth, especially for those who are from marginalized, silenced, oppressed, or overlooked communities. There is a systemic expectation that hard truths should go unspoken, especially if it causes discomfort. Let's shatter that expectation in this space and move forward in truth, knowing that our experiences have value and should not be tucked away. We hope by the end of this presentation, you will understand the importance of self care and self reflection as it relates to equitable exchanges. Get curious about forms of systemic and ingrained oppression, and raise awareness to combat inequities within your influence. And explore how to have equitable exchanges with staff and students. With that being said, I want to emphasize the fact that during this presentation, the purpose is not to be a history lesson. The purpose is to set the stage for grounds of change. The purpose of this presentation is to begin to make us think or add to our current thought processes on how we can progress as a district into equitable environments that acknowledge disproportionalities, oppression, and the lived experiences of those within our educational system. It is to allow us each in our own journeys to decide what side of change we would like to actively take part in. Before you begin, take a moment to ask yourself where you're at right now. There's so much going on in our world, in our workplaces, in our homes, and virtually every space that we exist in. Many of us have found ourselves faced with so many questions. What am I doing? Why am I here? What can I do? And my favorite, what in the world is going on? We want you to know that you are not alone. Allow yourself to acknowledge your internal questions and truly ask yourself, how am I really? Listen, life will be life, and it will continue to strap us on this roller coaster of ups and downs. There is no way around it. And our emotions have a huge impact on how we show up and how others experience us. It is so important that we have a habit of checking in with ourselves. so that we can consciously take an inventory and figure out how to make sure we are caring for ourselves through every high and low. Remember, we are no good to others when we are empty. We are limited when we are depleted. Check in, acknowledge how you feel, and ask yourself, what do I need in this time? How are you keeping yourself present and aware of life's beauties? You are your number one priority. Now that we've checked in, we are ready to transition into the depth of this presentation. But first, I'd like to leave you with a few words to remember.
You've invested a lot in your education, and people have invested in you. And let me tell you, the world needs your talents. Man, does it ever. The world needs a lot, and we need it from you. We really do. We need it from you young people. I mean, I'm not speaking for the rest of us up here, but I know I'm getting a little grayer. We need it from you, the young people, because remember this. So you got to get out there. You got to give it everything you got, whether it's your time, your talent, your prayers, or your treasures. Because remember this, you will never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. I'll say it again. You will never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. You can't take it with you. The Egyptians tried it, and all they got was robbed. So the question is, what are you going to do with what you have? I'm not talking about how much you have. Some of you are business majors. Some of you are theologians, nurses, sociologists. Some of you have money. Some of you have patience. Some of you have kindness. Some of you have love. Some of you have the gift of long suffering, whatever it is, whatever your gift is. What are you going to do with what you have? Fail big. That's right. Fail big. Today is the beginning of the rest of your life, and it can be very frightening. It's a new world out there. It's a mean world out there, and you only live once. So do what you feel passionate about. Take chances professionally. Don't be afraid to fail. There's an old IQ test was 9 dots, and you had to draw 5 lines with a pencil within these 9 dots without lifting the pencil. The only way to do it was to go outside the box. So don't be afraid to go outside the box. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Don't be afraid to fail big, to dream big. But remember, dreams without goals are just dreams, and they ultimately fuel disappointment. So have dreams, but have goals, life goals, yearly goals, monthly goals, daily goals. I try to give myself a goal every day. Sometimes it's just to not curse somebody out. Simple goals, but have goals. And understand that to achieve these goals, you must apply discipline and consistency. In order to achieve your goals, you must apply discipline, which you have already done, and consistency every day, not just on Tuesday and miss a few days. You have to work at it every day. You have to plan every day. You've heard the saying, we don't plan to fail, we fail to plan. Hard work works. Working really hard is what successful people do. And in this text, tweet, twerk world that you've grown up in, remember, just because you're doing a lot more doesn't mean you're getting a lot more done. Remember that. Just because you're doing a lot more doesn't mean you're getting a lot more done. Don't confuse movement with progress. My mother told me, she said, yeah, because you can run in place all the time and never get anywhere. So continue to strive, continue to have goals, continue to progress.
What resonated with you? What are we willing to do to push progression within our roles as a district? What are we willing to do to improve the lives of children we have been given the opportunity to interact with? Are we really willing to show up? Are we willing to carry the weight of knowing that every interaction we have with our students leaves behind something they may carry with them for the entirety of their lives? One moment can impact a lifetime. And knowing this, we must be as intentional as possible with our care of them because our efforts make an impact. Our efforts can elicit change or perpetuate damage. So, taking a dive into systems that are not conducive to liberation is just the first step, and a step well worth it for our students. There are so many inherently crippling prejudice and racist views that have been so embedded in society that even when we're doing what we think is right, we perpetuate the damage. In order to move forward, we have to rely on those who can see the blind spots and be those who have the courage to address the blind spots with the shared understanding that the intention is to build, not to tear down. I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. None of us are perfect. We will not always say and do the right things. It's impossible. We all have blind spots. It's not a testament to our character, but to the way society has historically operated and functioned. See, the truth is, a mindset was the start of oppression. This mindset led to a series of events that eventually became patterns, and more importantly, patterns of oppression that continued to be upheld through a bias structure. As you can see on the visual, the events and patterns are what are usually visible to us, but the structure is the foundation, the disease that we often only address the symptoms of. We didn't create it. We come into a system that has already been created. So, what do we need to unlearn? How do we prevent perpetuation of this? Are we willing to question it? Are we willing to question ourselves? How can we make it a daily practice to ask ourselves how we define equity? Take a look at this and examine the two comparisons. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Now, before I get ahead of myself, let me reassure you that we understand the need for structure and boundaries. But is it possible that in the typical educational structure, there are some similarities that are actually not conducive to a flourishing learning environment? Have you ever asked yourself why this is the typical model? Have you ever looked into the original function of the educational system? Instead of giving students the why and reasoning behind this structure, far too often within education, we lead with compliance and punishment, especially when it comes to BIPOC youth. The fact is, if the consequence doesn't teach a skill, then it's useless. Do I want you to do what I say or give you the skill to make productive choices without needing the fear of getting punished? How do we see behaviors? And do we criminalize behavior without teaching skills? Have you ever seen excessive discipline of students that you felt was unfair or different than you've seen other students treated? Have you gotten calls regarding minor behaviors that should have been handled in the classroom? Have you ever felt that you were used as a scare tactic, an enforcer, a weapon? We have heard the concern from your team that there is an unfair assumption that you directly impact the school to prison pipeline. The often ignored acknowledgement is someone called you into this situation. Who made the decision to use officer, you fill in the blank, to come and get a student in check? Who decided you would be a great tool to use to scare students into compliance? And why? So, in looking at the slide, we want you to understand we are not perpetuating that narrative or in any way supporting it. What we are saying is that we know the way your title is often used against students, which is not fair to you nor the students. I want to acknowledge those of you who actively advocate against the mistreatment of our students and for their safety. Also, thank you for often being a safe space for your students. Take a moment to read through some of the information on the slides. What does it make you think of? How does it make you feel? Earlier, I asked the question, how can we make it a daily practice to ask ourselves how we define equity? So I ask again, what does equity mean to you? If you were to close your eyes and think about what an equitable environment looks like, what do you see? What has been your experience with equity or inequities? Is it something you see and experience regularly in the spaces you serve? If it is, how do we replicate that in buildings where it's not so readily present? If it's not, what small steps can we begin to take to make an impact towards change? Defining equity, or even the idea of equity, may seem small to some. There are those who feel as though enough progress has been made and we only see little remnants of our past and our current history. While we are all entitled to our opinion, when it comes to inequities, racism, homophobia, ableism, any type of oppression, even a little bit is a lot. As stated before, inequities begin with a mindset, and that mindset dictates our behaviors. And even the smallest behaviors have an impact. This leads us to a short exploration of microaggressions. Microaggressions are everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. These are things that people see and experience every single day. These are interactions that many would call small or would expect one to just get over. But the fact is, a microaggression is not micro at all. It is a violent attack against the humanity of another based on areas of privilege that allow that type of weapon to be utilized. But you never know the type of weight these experiences place on the back of someone on the receiving end.
There are three types of microaggressions: micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. A micro assault is similar to what we think of as overt discrimination. In the case of micro assaults, those acts are intentional.
I was a server for a long time, and if anyone else was, you know this. In the back of the kitchen, like when someone gets a table of, like, say, Indian people. I hope this is PC. I don't know all the terms, but like Indian people or Black people or anyone, they'd be like, "Who wants that table? I don't want it. They're not going to tip." And my heart would break every time.
I used to be a server too, and I hated it because I was like the only person of like, you know, any type of race other than white. I remember coming in and they'd be like, "Oh, Danielle, you get that table of raccoons," and I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah." Then I would go and I'm like, "They're Black people," and I was like, "Wait, is that what you call Black people? You call them raccoons?"
A micro assault can be the deliberate posting of swastikas, Confederate flags, racial slurs or epithets that are left on a blackboard in a micro insult is a comment that communicates the demographic group is not respected, that that person is a slight exception to the stereotype. It's an insult, even though the perpetrator thinks he has just rendered a compliment.
Well, here at UNT, I've heard, "You're so pretty for a Black girl." I feel like it discounts me as a person, and then I feel like it discounts my race. I feel like you can be pretty just because you're a woman, or, you know, or all Black women are beautiful, all people of color are beautiful. just the same as people that are not people of color. So for them to make that specific statement, that's what I'm like, why, what in you made you say that to me? As if it were a compliment.
So another type of micro insult is when students in the classroom are dismissed or treated almost as if they're invisible. For instance, in some of our sciences or engineering classes, there are few women, and professors often don't call on those women.
I had one instance in a statistics-based class where we were discussing something bell curve related, and he presented a question, and I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but I answered it, and he kind of doubted me, and he very condescendingly was just like, "Oh, okay, well, I mean, like, this is the best answer, but I guess your answer could be right. You know what? We'll ask." It was a grad student. He was like, "You know what? We'll ask Dr. So and so and see what he thinks the best answer is." And there was no apology or anything. He was just like, "Oh yeah, Dr. So and so said that. Yeah, that was actually a really acceptable answer." I was just like, "Okay." What else is he going to doubt me on, and when else am I going to be called out in front of 70 other people, and have a weird exchange that makes the whole room quiet? Like,
a micro-invalidation is a comment or action that dismisses the experiences of historically disadvantaged group members. Micro-invalidations can happen when, for instance, when a student is lamenting that she wishes there were more Latina faculty, for instance, and the students in the class start rolling their eyes or, "Oh, come on, get over it," and the professor goes along with the students instead of with the person who made the lament. Another type of micro-invalidation, one that we hear a lot about today, is being colorblind. When people say, "I don't notice you're Black. I don't notice you're Latina. I don't see color." What does that mean? How do you interpret that? What are people saying when they say, "I don't notice your race. I don't see color"? How do you interpret that?
They're just trying to say that they're not racist, that they don't look at that side of you and they just want to validate you as a person, but it comes off wrong because it's like your race is very much who you are as an individual.
In a lot of my mini classes, I have to do writings, and it's just professors seem to be like don't want to hurt my feelings because I'm an international student, so mine is not that good, especially with my writing. So they let me go easy, like I just feel like they have different expectations for international student and just American students, and like a lot of feedback that I get from like my writings is just like not very meaningful because I just feel like they just try not to hurt my feelings, try to go easy on me, but then by doing that I just feel like it takes toll on my like development, like my learning, my writing and art stuff.
Think about your own story. Have you told anybody your story? Have you done, seen, or experienced this? Have you ever microaggressed against someone? Where does that come from? If you've been on the receiving end, question what you were taught about how to react. Were you taught to brush it off and ignore it? Were you taught it's not that big of a deal? Were you taught to address it head on? What has society told you about how others should be allowed to see and treat you? How have these things impacted you in your life? How do you think it impacts our students?
Oh, you're so pretty for a Black girl. Oh, she has a Jew nose. Oh, your hair would look so good if it was straight. Jews are so cheap. Why are you so cheap?
Do you speak good English? How are you an Iraqi Jew? I think the person saying microaggression kind of doesn't really think about it.
This person who said it was my friend, and like I was just honest, they would like say something like that.
You don't want to make a big deal about it, But then it's also like, you just said something that offended me, so I feel like I should speak up.
Because they're micro, because they're very subtle, they're small, you feel like you don't have a reason to be upset. You're overreacting, and people even can make you feel that way when you bring it up.
They're like, oh, you can't take a joke. You're making too big of a deal of this. Why are you overreacting?
Don't take it so seriously. It was just a joke. Chill out.
Say like, oh no, I actually love Black people. I love people of color. Like, they try to just minimize the situation. If someone feels hurt by a microaggression, it shouldn't just be pushed to the side.
It definitely has negative impacts and like
Leads to people disliking who they actually are.
those kinds of subtle offensive comments can build up over time, and they can have like a deep psychological effect, and they can make you feel bad, and they can make you doubt yourself.
We try to just use jokes to like make things less awkward or like ease social experiences, but it is important because you need to like be aware of what you're saying and like who you're speaking to. Think of what you say and how it can affect the person you're saying it to.
Oftentimes, we can feel helpless and unheard. You may feel unseen, misunderstood, ignored, scapegoated, even. We may have subscribed to the thought that this is just the way things are, so I have to live with it. But what does that mean for our students? Ask yourself a few questions. What are the things that need to happen for true change to start? What would need to shift in our lives, in the district, in our society? How can you, in your realm of control, contribute to change? What inspiration and care do you need to make it happen? Who are like minded individuals you can lean on? Your allies? What resources do you have? How are you taking care of yourself to ensure that you're whole enough to contribute to the change? Ultimately, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to say? Who are you willing to be? A courageous conversation engages those who won't talk, sustains the conversation when it gets uncomfortable or diverted, and deepens the conversation to the point where authentic understanding and meaningful actions occur. I think it's safe to say that if we are unsure how to make a first step, what that first step looks like, or how we can even make an impact, a conversation or an equitable exchange is one of the safest, most powerful tools of forward movement. The conversation has the potential to set the groundwork for action. When thinking of how to move into action and advocacy, we must always acknowledge our comfort zone and what it takes to remove ourselves from that space. What are your self protective strategies? What is your default reaction? How do you get out of uncomfortable situations? What would prevent you from speaking up or taking action? What could prevent others from hearing you? This looks different for all of us. For some of us, there may be fear. For others of us, there may be no fear, but there may be a wall that we have mastered that prevents others from coming in or us coming out. Now think about that feeling that comes up and experience it. What happens in your body when you think about moving outside of your comfort zone? What are you feeling? And ask yourself why. Finally, confront that feeling and choose one next step to move forward. And before I move on, always ask yourself, what are my biases? Whether we like to admit it or not, we all have them. And if we are unwilling to look at our biases, they too become blind spots that can and most likely will cause damage. So I ask, where are you? Ask yourself, what am I sitting with right now that others may not understand but need to in order to know where I'm at? There are so many life factors that affect us that we cannot necessarily control. These things have an impact on how we show up, and our awareness of them is imperative in supporting and being supported. It is arguably the foundation of equitable exchanges. Here are a few sentence stems we may want to use to help start off these conversations. I'm feeling blank because blank. Are you willing to blank? My concerns are I'm present, but I'm worried about. These are also things we can teach to our students as they learn to have equitable exchanges as well. As we wrap up, there are a few things I'd like you to remember. First, acknowledge that you are taking a risk and understand that this risk is a part of breaking away from inequities that are rooted in historical events, patterns, and structures. Know who you're speaking to and provide context. Give grace while standing firm. Build relationship if possible. Know your supports. Lean into the discomfort and consider how you will respond to criticism and opposition. Know that every step, every conversation is an opportunity to connect and be transparent, an opportunity to do and say what we know is right, an opportunity to model courage and vulnerability, because as we know, our students are always watching, an opportunity to go back and do something different. We don't have to hold ourselves to what I should have done, what I could have done, what I would have done. We can choose to do something different in the moment. We have an opportunity to model choices. We have an opportunity to grow. And most importantly, we have an opportunity to speak our truth and refuse to be silenced. What commitments are you willing to make to yourself so you show up whole? Remember, we cannot adequately take care of others if we are not taking care of ourselves. What do you need to make sure that you are showing up whole, not just at work, but in life? What can you do when you need to address inequities? What's that small step or big step outside of your comfort zone you can take to call attention to inequities? What are you going to get curious about? What questions do you need to ask yourself? What things do you need to research? Who do you need to get curious about? Who is one person you can connect with that you are comfortable with diving deeper? A person you trust and feel safe with. A person that will be honest with you and help you explore your blind spots or emotions. And finally, in your spaces, how will you invite your students to speak their truth? Remember, we are all educators because each of us is teaching the students who we are privileged to share space with. They are watching and learning by how they see us operate. With that being said, this is just a reminder of what you already know. Ultimately, we all show up for our students, our babies, our kids, whatever you call them, but we are all here for them. And if we can see them as people, if we can build relationships with them, if we can show them grace, love, and patience, that will fuel our fire to continue to show up every day and fight on their behalf. We will end with a few take home questions you can use. Jot these down and use them as tools. And finally, as redundant as this may sound, take care of you. Remember, self care is key. Always acknowledge how you feel and embrace those feelings and emotions. Remember, our emotions often dictate our behavior. How well we take care of ourselves impacts how we can take care of others. And also, your energy can translate to others and create those feelings within that person. So we want to always be as intentional as possible in regards to the way we care for ourselves, because it will have an impact on the world within us and around us. Please utilize the resources provided to you as a Denver Public Schools employee and look up the Wellbeing Resource Center for some great resources and tools that are offered to you. And finally, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for who you are. And thank you for showing up despite difficulties you may face on a day-to-day basis. We want you to know that we see you. We want you to know that we are truly here to walk with you and hope that you are willing to walk with us as well. Have a great day.